He was a man everyone admired, a brilliant, wealthy doctor with a life people could only dream of, a beautiful wife, a luxurious home, and a career built on saving others. But behind that perfect smile was a secret darker than anyone could imagine. Late at night, his wife would hear him whispering on the phone, see messages he couldn't explain, and feel the warmth in their marriage slowly fade away. What she didn't know was that her husband had fallen in love, not with medicine, not with his family, but with one of his patients. The affair started as passion, turned into obsession, and ended in a deadly plan. Because when the doctor realized he couldn't live with both women, he decided one had to die. What happened next would shock the nation and expose the terrifying truth about a man trusted to save lives, who instead planned to take one. At first glance, Dr. Richard Hale was everything a man could hope to be: intelligent, respected, and admired by his peers. A top-rated cardiologist with a reputation for saving lives, his name was known across the city for his skill, precision, and compassion. He lived in a beautiful suburban home with his wife, Emily, who had stood by his side since medical school. Together, they were the picture of success: 2 kids, charity galas, and family portraits that could have graced a magazine cover. To everyone around them, the Hales were untouchable, a model couple living the dream. But like every perfect picture, there were cracks that no one could see. Emily had begun to feel the distance long before she could explain it. Richard wasn't the same man he used to be. He worked later than usual, often coming home past midnight, claiming emergency surgeries or after-hours consultations. He kept his phone close, even in the shower, and his once warm smile now carried something colder: distraction, guilt, or maybe both. Emily tried to brush off her suspicions. She told herself he was just stressed. Doctors had tough schedules after all. But it wasn't just work. The emotional connection that once held them together had started to fade. The dinners they used to enjoy in laughter now ended in silence. The bed that once symbolized closeness now felt like a gulf between strangers. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Richard was becoming someone different. He was admired for his calm under pressure, but lately, nurses whispered that he'd grown irritable, short-tempered, and distracted. He spent more time in his office than the operating room, and his colleagues noticed how his attention wandered during meetings. What they didn't know was that a new patient had entered his life, a young woman named Claire Turner. Claire was everything Emily wasn't. She was bold, flirtatious, and dangerously unpredictable. She came into his office one rainy afternoon complaining of chest pains, but left behind something far more dangerous: temptation. From that first consultation, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years: excitement. She was younger, uninhibited, and most importantly, she admired him. Where Emily questioned, Claire adored. And soon, admiration turned into something far more personal. At first, it was innocent: a few extra minutes in her appointments, small jokes that lingered too long, and glances that said more than words. But within weeks, the boundaries between doctor and patient vanished. They began meeting after work, first for coffee, then for dinner, and finally in hotel rooms miles away from town. For the first time in years, Richard felt alive, as if he had rediscovered a version of himself he thought was gone. But that feeling came with a price. Every moment with Claire made going home unbearable. Emily's questions started to sound like accusations, and her affection like control. He grew distant, colder, defensive, his guilt twisted into resentment, the kind that festers and poisons everything it touches. He told himself he deserved to be happy, that he'd spent years working, sacrificing, building a life that never truly felt his. Now he wanted to claim what he believed he was owed: freedom. Friends began to notice his shift. He stopped attending family gatherings, spent weekends at conferences, and grew more secretive than ever. Even his children sensed it. The father who once played in the yard now barely spoke at dinner. But while his family unraveled, Richard's passion for Claire only intensified. She became his escape, his addiction, his new world. Yet, as their affair deepened, so did the danger. Claire began asking questions about Emily, about their future, about when he would finally leave her. Richard had no answers. He wanted both: the safety of his perfect image and the thrill of his forbidden love. But that double life couldn't last forever. The walls were closing in, and Richard knew he couldn't keep both women in his world. And that's when the thought, dark, fleeting, but powerful, first entered his mind. What if there was a way out? What if Emily simply wasn't there anymore? It started as a whisper in the back of his mind, but soon that whisper would grow into something deadly, a plan that would destroy the perfect life he had spent decades felt. What began as a harmless flirtation between a doctor and his patient quickly turned into a dangerous obsession. Richard Hale, the man who once took an oath to save lives, was now playing with fire, and he didn't care who got burned. Claire Turner wasn't just another woman seeking medical attention. She was a storm in human form. She knew how to charm, how to manipulate, and how to make a man feel invincible. She told Richard that he made her feel safe, that no one had ever cared for her the way he did. Those words, simple, flattering, intoxicating, were all it took to pull him deeper into her web. Their affair grew reckless. They would meet in hotel rooms near the outskirts of town, always under fake names. Richard used his hospital schedule as a cover: emergency calls, patient transfers, late surgeries. But behind every excuse was the same destination: Claire. They spent hours together, tangled between lust and lies, speaking about a future that could never exist. Claire began to dream out loud about a life with him. No more hiding, no more secrets. But for that to happen, there was one obstacle in the way: Emily. At first, Richard laughed off the idea. Divorce wasn't simple, not for a man with his reputation. He had money, status, and a name to protect. A scandal could destroy his career, ruin his family, and strip him of everything he had worked for. But the more time he spent with Claire, the more distant that logic became. He started imagining a life without Emily: no arguments, no guilt, just freedom. Claire encouraged the fantasy, whispering that they were meant to be together, that his wife didn't understand him. Soon, their secret love affair started bleeding into his professional life. Nurses noticed how his mood swung wildly. One day, he was euphoric; the next, distracted and volatile. A colleague found him staring at his phone during a critical meeting, a message from Claire flashing across the screen. When will she be gone? It was the first time the thought of getting rid of Emily felt. The idea of killing Emily Hale didn't come overnight. It crept into Richard's mind slowly, like a poison he couldn't shake. At first, it was just a thought, then a fantasy, and finally, a plan. By now, his affair with Claire had consumed him completely. He couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything other than being free from the life he had built. Divorce meant scandal, lost patience, and a ruined career. But a clean, quiet death. That, in Richard's mind, was surgical. Quick, permanent, perfect. He began researching methods late at night when his wife was asleep beside him. At first, he searched medical ways to induce heart failure, then shifted to something darker: untraceable poisons, car accidents, staged robberies. His medical expertise made him feel untouchable. He thought he could commit the perfect crime, but even he knew that suspicion would eventually fall on the husband. That's when he realized he needed someone else to do the job. Through one of his hospital maintenance workers, a man with a shady past, Richard started asking quiet, dangerous questions. The worker, uneasy, mentioned someone he knew who could handle problems. That someone was not a killer at all, but a paid police informant who had set up multiple sting operations for the FBI. Within days, undercover agents began tracking Richard's every move, pretending to be part of the criminal network he was trying to contact. The first meeting took place in a dimly lit parking lot behind a diner just off the interstate. The supposed hitman, actually an undercover agent, arrived with a hidden microphone. Richard showed up wearing his expensive watch, nervous but determined. They sat in his car, engine running, as Richard outlined exactly what he wanted. His words were cold, clinical, like he was discussing a medical procedure. "It needs to look like an accident," he said quietly. "No signs of struggle. No questions." The undercover hitman nodded, asking questions about timing, location, and payment. Richard didn't hesitate. He offered $25,000 in cash up front, promising another $25,000 after the job was done. He even provided photographs of Emily, her face, her car, the route she took every morning for her morning jog. He mapped out her schedule in perfect detail, down to the minute. For a man who had saved countless lives, he was disturbingly calm as he planned to take one. The next morning, Dr. Richard Hale woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was early. Too early. His heart pounded as he read the message that appeared on the screen. "It's done. The surgery is complete." The words were simple, but to him, they meant freedom. For the first time in months, he smiled. He looked around his bedroom. The silence, almost comforting Emily's side of the bed, was empty, and he imagined she would never lie there again. In that single moment, Richard believed he had finally erased the one obstacle standing between him and his new life with Claire. He showered, dressed carefully, and even stopped by his favorite cafe for coffee, as if it were just another day. To everyone he met that morning, patients, nurses, colleagues, he appeared calm, collected, almost cheerful. No one could have guessed that the man fixing hearts had just ordered one to be stopped forever. But while Richard was playing the role of the calm, professional doctor, a massive undercover operation was already underway. The FBI, working with local law enforcement, had set up surveillance around his clinic and home. They had everything: audio recordings, video evidence, phone logs, bank transfers, and even photographs of the fake crime scene. Now, it was time to end the game. At noon, 2 detectives approached the hospital, walking briskly through the lobby in plain clothes. They found Richard in his office, mid-consultation. One flashed a badge. "Dr. Hale, we need you to come with us," the officer said calmly. Richard's brow furrowed. "Is something wrong?" he asked, trying to sound confused. Minutes later, he was sitting in a sterile interview room at the police station. The air felt cold, heavy. He kept asking questions, pretending to be clueless. "What is this about? Did something happen to my wife?" he finally asked. The lead investigator looked him dead in the eyes and replied, "I'm afraid so." Then she slid a stack of photographs across the table. Richard stared down at the images. Photos of Emily's body, her car parked near the jogging trail, the blood-spattered ground. For a brief second, he froze. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and whispered, "It's done." His tone wasn't grief. It was relief. The detectives exchanged glances. One of them leaned forward. "You seem calm, Doctor." Richard shrugged slightly. "There's nothing I can do now." That was all they needed. The entire exchange was being recorded, every word captured. A few seconds later, the investigator signaled to the team outside. The door opened, and in walked the undercover hitman, still wired, still playing his role. He nodded toward Richard, saying, "Just wanted to make sure you were satisfied." And then came the twist, the one moment that shattered Richard Hale's illusion of control. The investigator smiled faintly and said, "Oh, She's alive, doctor. Richard's eyes widened. What? The investigator repeated, Emily Hale is alive. She's in protective custody. We know everything. The color drained from Richard's face. His breathing grew uneven. He tried to laugh it off at first. You can't prove anything, he stammered. But the detective only reached into a folder and began laying down evidence, one piece after another. Photos of him handing over cash, recordings of him describing how he wanted the job done, the text messages, the map, his own voice saying, when it's done, text me, the surgery is complete. Each word echoed in the small room like a hammer driving in nails. Richard's arrogance melted into panic. He tried to backpedal, insisting it was a misunderstanding, that he was testing the man, that it was all a joke. But the evidence was undeniable. Within minutes, officers entered the room, cuffed him, and read his rights. Outside, news crews were already gathering. Word had leaked of the shocking arrest. Doctor accused of hiring hitman to kill wife. His picture, once on hospital billboards and charity posters, was now plastered across every news channel in the country. That evening, Emily watched the coverage from a safe location. Tears streamed down her face, but not from heartbreak, from disbelief. The man she loved, the father of her children, had plotted her death. Meanwhile, Richard sat alone in a holding cell, still in his neatly pressed suit, staring at his reflection in the glass. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about surgery, money, or Claire. He was thinking about the moment everything had changed. The moment he mistook love for obsession and traded his soul for a lie. The healer had become the destroyer, and now, the doctor who once held life in his hands had lost control of his own. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashed, and the public had gathered to witness the fall of a man who had once been untouchable. Dr. Richard Hale, dressed in a dark suit, sat quietly in the defendant's chair, his hands clasped tightly together. The confident, charming doctor who had once commanded respect in hospitals and charity galas was now a man on trial for conspiracy to commit murder, a plot against his own wife. The prosecution began by laying out the evidence in chilling detail. They played the audio recordings of Richard discussing the perfect murder with the undercover hitman. The room fell silent as his own words echoed. Precise instructions, detailed plans, and cold calculations. Then came the photos of Emily, taken by the FBI to document the plan, and the manila envelope of cash that Richard had handed over. Every element meticulously recorded. Witnesses included colleagues from the hospital, who testified about the drastic change in Richard's behavior. Nurses recalled late nights, sudden mood swings, and unexplained absences. Friends spoke of a man obsessed, distracted, and increasingly distant from his family. Then came Claire Turner's testimony, or rather, her absence. She had vanished from the public eye, refusing to appear in court. Her absence became part of the narrative, the young patient who had lured a respected doctor into a deadly affair, leaving a trail of lies and danger in her wake. Richard's defense lawyer tried to argue that his client's statements were fantasies, that he had never intended to follow through. But the prosecution dismantled this argument piece by piece, highlighting the specificity of his plans, the transfer of cash, and the elaborate preparations that indicated intent beyond imagination. The jury listened, stunned, as the recordings replayed, showing a man who was methodical, calm, and fully aware of what he was orchestrating. Emily Hale, who had been placed under protective custody during the investigation, attended the trial in person. She remained composed, though her eyes betrayed the pain of betrayal. The woman who had once shared her life, dreams, and family, with Richard now watched as the man she trusted had plotted her death. Her testimony, brief but powerful, recounted the changes she noticed in her husband, the distance, the late-night calls, the secretive behavior, and the realization that she had been in real danger. The closing arguments were intense, The prosecution emphasized the betrayal of trust, the manipulation of desire, and the premeditated nature of the crime. "This was not a fleeting thought," the lead prosecutor said. "This was a calculated plan to end a life for personal gain, cloaked under the guise of love." The defense begged the jury to consider the emotional state, the stress of work, and the fantasy elements, portraying Richard as a man who had crossed a dangerous line but never intended real harm. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in whispers and camera flashes. The sentence was severe: decades in prison without parole. The once admired doctor would never practice medicine again, never walk freely among the patients who once trusted him, and never escape the shadow of the crime he had plotted. Outside the courthouse, reporters described the story as one of the most shocking true crime cases in recent history. A wealthy doctor, trusted and respected, undone by lust, obsession, and greed. Emily gave a brief statement, urging others to be aware of the warning signs of betrayal and obsession, and to never underestimate the danger hidden behind a perfect facade. Richard Hale's world had crumbled completely. His wife alive, his lover vanished, and his reputation destroyed. He faced the reality of his actions. A man who had once been celebrated for saving lives had tried to take one for his selfish desires. In prison, stripped of freedom, respect, and influence, he would have nothing left but time to reflect on the choices that led him from healer to would-be killer. The case became a chilling reminder. Even those we trust the most can hide deadly secrets, and passion, obsession, and betrayal can turn love into a crime. For Emily, life slowly returned to a semblance of normal. But for Richard Hale, the consequences of his deadly obsession would last a lifetime. A story that would forever haunt the headlines and remain etched in the annals of true crime.